At midnight, wrapped in my thin shawl, I sent the simplest message to my son: "Please bring me a blanket." And they laughed out loud, my son and his wife. I never imagined that a request so tender could be met with such cold amusement. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Dorothy, and I'm 73 years old. I live in a cramped one-bedroom apartment on the south side of Chicago, where the wind cuts through the old windows like a blade. My days blur into an exhausting routine that begins before the sun rises over Lake Michigan. I wake at 5:30, my arthritic hands already aching as I reach for the reading glasses that have become my constant companion. The apartment smells of burnt coffee mingled with the faint scent of mildew from the old carpet that came with the place 15 years ago. I tried to knit scarves that I hoped would make some extra dollars, sitting by the window for hours, watching the rain smear the city lights below. My fingers moved slower now, and sometimes I'd drop stitches without noticing until I'd gone too far to fix them easily. Walking to the grocery store 3 blocks away had become an ordeal. My pension barely covered rent, utilities, and food, so I'd calculate every purchase, putting back items when the total climbed too high. I'd stand there at the checkout counter, my cheeks burning with embarrassment as other customers waited behind me while I decided between milk and bread. That particular October night, the chill crept deeper than ever before. The radiator in my building hadn't worked properly in months, and the landlord kept promising to fix it next week, next month. I wore 2 sweaters to bed and still shivered under my one thin blanket. Around 11:30, I remembered the extra blanket, a soft blue one I'd carefully folded and tucked away in the hall closet months ago for emergencies just like this. But when I opened the closet door, it wasn't there. My heart tightened in my chest. I searched every corner of my small apartment, moving boxes and old magazines, looking behind the couch and under the bed. Nothing. That blanket was gone, and with it, my last defense against the cold. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my phone. My son Marcus lived only 20 minutes away in Lincoln Park with his wife Jennifer and my granddaughter Ellie. They had a beautiful 3-bedroom townhouse with heated floors and a fireplace. Surely they could spare a blanket for one night. Surely they would want to help their mother, their grandmother, stay warm. With trembling fingers, I typed the message: "Please bring me a blanket. I'm so cold tonight." I added a heart emoji and pressed send, then sat there watching the screen, waiting for the quick "on my way" or "be right there, Mom" that I knew would come. The response arrived within seconds: "LOL, Mom, seriously? It's a blanket, not a big deal. Just put on more clothes or something." Then came another message from Jennifer: "Drama much? It's not even that cold outside." And then I heard it through the thin walls: laughter. Loud, sharp laughter coming from their direction. They were making fun of me. Their elderly mother, sitting alone in the cold, asking for basic comfort, and they were laughing. The cold in my chest deepened, spreading far beyond what any Chicago winter could create. I pulled the thin shawl tighter around my shoulders and felt something break inside me. Not just my heart, that had been cracking for months. Something deeper. Something that had been holding me together through all the disappointments, all the forgotten phone calls, all the times I'd been treated like an inconvenience rather than family. I closed my eyes and let the memories wash over me. Marcus as a baby, so small and perfect in my arms at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. The smell of his head, that sweet newborn scent that made me promise I'd always protect him. Teaching him to ride his bike in Lincoln Park, running behind him with my hand on his back until he was steady enough to go on his own. There was our wedding photo, now faded and curled at the edges from being handled so often. My husband Robert and me, so young and full of dreams, planning the family we'd build together. Before the cancer took him when Marcus was only 12. Before I had to raise our son alone, working double shifts at the hospital to keep us afloat. I remembered every sacrifice I'd made. Every time I went without so Marcus could have what he needed. The Christmas I ate peanut butter sandwiches for dinner so he could have the bicycle he wanted. The way I'd patched his clothes and stretched every dollar, making sure he never felt the weight of our financial struggles. When Marcus was 16, he'd come home with tears in his eyes because he needed money for a school trip to Washington, D.C. All his friends were going, and he felt left out. I looked at my bank account that night, $67.43 until my next paycheck. I sold my mother's pearl necklace, the only valuable thing I owned, to give him that trip. He never knew about the necklace. Never asked where the money came from. Just hugged me tight and called me the best mom in the world. Where was that boy now? I thought about all the weekends I'd spent alone while he was out with friends, all the holidays where I cooked for hours only to eat by myself when he didn't show up. The graduations from high school, then college, where I sat in the audience bursting with pride while he barely acknowledged me afterward. When he married Jennifer 5 years ago, I spent my entire savings account on a down payment for their wedding venue. $8,000, every penny I had put away for emergencies. They never paid me back, even though they'd promised they would once they got settled in their careers. "Mom, can you send me some money?" became a regular refrain. His voice would crack over the phone, sometimes late at night when I was already in bed. "The car needs repairs," or "Jennifer's student loans are killing us," or "We need help with the mortgage this month." I'd lie awake afterward, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out how to stretch my fixed income even further. I sold furniture to help them. I sold books, dishes, even my husband's old tools from the garage. Piece by piece, I watched my memories disappear into their bank account while my own apartment grew emptier and colder. The requests came more frequently as time passed. 100 here, 200 there. Sometimes more. Jennifer would call too, her voice sweet and persuasive. "Dorothy, you know we wouldn't ask if we weren't desperate. We'll pay you back as soon as Marcus gets his promotion." But the promotions never came, or when they did, the money never found its way back to me. I started to feel like a human ATM machine. They'd call when they needed something, but the phone stayed silent otherwise. Weeks would pass without hearing from them, and when I'd reach out, their responses were short and distracted. "Can't talk now, Mom. We're busy. Maybe next weekend. We'll call you back." They rarely did. I began to wonder if I was being foolish. If my love for my son was blinding me to what others could see clearly. Mrs. Garcia, my neighbor from down the hall, would shake her head when she saw me counting out bills to send to Marcus again. "Mija," she'd say in her gentle voice, "children should take care of their parents, not the other way around. You raised him already." But I'd brush off her concerns. He was my son. He needed me. That's what mothers do, right? We sacrifice. We give. We love unconditionally, even when that love isn't returned in equal measure. The breaking point had been building for months, like pressure in a pot about to boil over. Last spring, my 73rd birthday came and went without a single phone call from Marcus or Jennifer. I sat by my window all day, watching people walk by on the street below, holding my phone and checking it every few minutes to make sure it was working. At 8 o'clock that night, I finally called him myself. "Oh, Mom, hi," he said, and I could hear the television in the background. "What's up?" "It's my birthday," I said quietly. There was a pause. "Oh, right. Happy birthday. Sorry, we've been really busy with work stuff. Jennifer's got this big presentation, and I've been working overtime. Too busy to remember the woman who gave birth to him. Too busy to call the person who'd given him life. Maybe we can do something next weekend," he said, but even as the words left his mouth, I knew they were empty. Next weekend would bring new excuses, new reasons why they couldn't spare an hour for their 73-year-old mother. That was 6 months ago. We never did do anything for my birthday. The pattern continued through the summer and into fall. I'd call them, and they'd always be rushing somewhere or dealing with some crisis that seemed to consume all their time and energy. But their social media told a different story. I'd scroll through Jennifer's Facebook page and see pictures of them at restaurants, at concerts, on weekend trips to Wisconsin. They had time for everything except me. When I got sick with a persistent cough last winter, I called to ask if one of them could drive me to the doctor. My own car had broken down months earlier, and I couldn't afford to fix it. "Can't you take the bus?" Jennifer suggested. "Or maybe call an Uber?" Take the bus while sick, in the middle of Chicago winter, at 73 years old. The thought terrified me, but I did it anyway because I had no choice. I sat on that cold bus, coughing and shivering, feeling like I was invisible to the world. The doctor said it was just a cold, but the visit cost me $200 I didn't have. I ate peanut butter sandwiches for 2 weeks to make up the difference in my budget. When I mentioned the medical bill to Marcus, thinking maybe he could help since I'd helped them so many times, he just shrugged. "Healthcare is expensive, Mom. We're all struggling with money these days." This from the man whose wife had just posted pictures of their new leather sectional sofa on Instagram. The disconnection grew wider with each passing month. I'd try to share stories about my day, about the nice conversation I'd had with Mrs. Garcia or the interesting book I was reading, and I could practically hear their eyes rolling through the phone. "That's nice, Mom," they'd say in voices that clearly conveyed they weren't really listening. Then they'd redirect the conversation back to their own problems, their work stress, their financial concerns that somehow always seemed to circle back to needing my help. I started to feel like I existed solely to solve their problems and fund their lifestyle. When I wasn't useful, I wasn't worth their time. The loneliness settled into my bones like arthritis, a constant ache that grew worse during the long Chicago winters. I'd go days without speaking to another human being except for brief interactions at the grocery store or with Mrs. Garcia in the hallway. My world had shrunk to the size of my small apartment, and the walls felt like they were closing in. I tried to fill the emptiness with activities. I joined a senior center a few miles away, taking the bus twice a week to play cards with other elderly people who seemed just as lonely as I was. But even there, Conversations centered around children and grandchildren who didn't visit enough, adult kids who took but never gave back. I wasn't the only one feeling forgotten. The financial strain was constant too. My Social Security barely covered my basic expenses, and every month was a juggling act of which bills to pay first and which could wait. The money I'd been sending to Marcus added up to hundreds of dollars I couldn't spare, money that could have gone toward better food, warmer clothes, maybe fixing my heating properly. But every time I considered saying no to his requests, I'd remember him as a little boy, looking up at me with complete trust and love. How could I let him down? How could I be the kind of mother who turned her back on her child when he needed help? The guilt was overwhelming, but so was the growing resentment. I found myself lying awake at night, adding up all the money I'd given them over the years. It had to be close to $20,000 by now. $20,000 that could have made my golden years comfortable instead of a constant struggle. I started keeping track in a small notebook, writing down every amount I sent and the reason they'd given for needing it. Car repairs that never seemed to get done. Emergency expenses that happened with suspicious regularity. Promises to pay me back that evaporated as soon as the money changed hands. The notebook became evidence of a pattern I'd been too heartbroken to see clearly before. Then came the incident that changed everything. I was going through some old papers in my closet, looking for my insurance documents, when I found a stack of unopened mail that had been delivered to my apartment by mistake. It was addressed to Marcus and Jennifer, but at my address. I almost threw it away without looking, but something made me pause. The return address was from a financial advisor's office downtown. I opened the first envelope with trembling hands, telling myself I was just making sure it wasn't something urgent that needed to be forwarded to them immediately. What I found inside made my blood run cold. It was a statement showing their investment portfolio. The balance at the bottom of the page showed over $300,000 in stocks, bonds, and cryptocurrency investments. $300,000. I opened the second envelope, then the third. Bank statements showing checking account balances that dwarfed my entire yearly income. Credit card statements with limits higher than my total lifetime savings. They were wealthy. Not just comfortable, but genuinely wealthy. While I'd been eating peanut butter sandwiches and choosing between heat and medicine, they'd been building a fortune in the stock market. The Bitcoin investments alone were worth more than I'd made in 20 years of working. I sat on my floor surrounded by papers, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. Every dollar I'd sent them, every sacrifice I'd made, every time I'd gone without so they could have more, it had all been a lie. They didn't need my money. They'd never needed my money. They'd been taking advantage of my love, my guilt, my desperate desire to feel useful and wanted. I was nothing more than a source of extra cash flow, a naive old woman too blind to see she was being manipulated. That night, I did something I hadn't done in months. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, really looked. The woman staring back at me was thin and tired, with hollow eyes and sagging shoulders. I looked like someone who'd given up on herself, who'd forgotten she had any value beyond what she could provide to others. I barely recognized the person I'd become. The next morning, I called Marcus. My hands were shaking as I dialed his number, but my voice was steady when he answered. "We need to talk," I said. "What about, Mom? I'm kind of busy right now." "About the money. About all the money I've been sending you." There was a pause. "What about it?" "I know about your investments, Marcus. I know about the stocks and the Bitcoin and the $300,000 you have sitting in your portfolio." The silence stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. "Mom, I can explain." "No," I said, and the firmness in my own voice surprised me. "You can't explain. There is no explanation for this. You've been lying to me for years, taking money from your elderly mother while you build wealth I could never dream of having." "It's not like that," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "It's complicated. Those investments are for our future, for retirement. The money you've been helping with is for current expenses." "Current expenses like leather sofas and weekend trips?" Another pause. "You've been spying on us?" "I've been caring about you. There's a difference. But I'm done now, Marcus. I'm done being your personal bank account. I'm done being treated like an inconvenience except when you need money." "Mom, you're overreacting. We appreciate everything you've done for us. Appreciation would be visiting me more than twice a year. Appreciation would be remembering my birthday. Appreciation would be honesty about your financial situation instead of manipulating an old woman who loves you." I could hear Jennifer's voice in the background, but I couldn't make out what she was saying. "Look, Mom, maybe we can sit down and talk about this when everyone's calmer. We're talking about it now. And here's what's going to change: I won't be sending any more money. Not for emergencies, not for anything. You'll need to figure out how to live on your considerable income without subsidies from your mother's Social Security check." The conversation ended badly, with raised voices and hurt feelings on both sides. But for the first time in years, I felt something I'd almost forgotten: self-respect. The weeks that followed were difficult. Marcus called a few times, his tone alternating between anger and manipulation. He'd try guilt first. "Mom, I can't believe you'd abandon us like this. After everything we've been through as a family." When that didn't work, he'd switch to false promises. "We were planning to pay you back all at once my portfolio reached a certain level." Jennifer tried a different approach, calling with honey in her voice. "Dorothy, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Maybe we could all sit down over dinner and work this out." But when I declined, her tone turned cold. "Fine. Don't say we didn't try to include you." The attempts at reconciliation became less frequent as autumn turned to winter. By December, the phone calls had stopped altogether. My birthday came and went again without acknowledgement. This time, I wasn't surprised, but it still hurt. Mrs. Garcia brought me a piece of Tres Leches cake and sat with me while I opened a card from my cousin in California, the only family member who'd remembered. "You did the right thing, Mija," Mrs. Garcia said as we sipped tea together. "Sometimes love means saying no." Christmas was the hardest. I spent it alone, watching It's a Wonderful Life on television while snow fell outside my window. I thought about calling Marcus, about swallowing my pride and pretending nothing had happened. But I couldn't go back to being a walking ATM machine. I wouldn't. That's when the blanket incident happened. The night I texted asking for something as basic as warmth and received laughter in return, I realized how completely the relationship had deteriorated. I wasn't their mother anymore in any meaningful sense. I was just an obligation they'd rather avoid, a reminder of responsibilities they didn't want to fulfill. I sat in my cold apartment that night, wrapped in my thin shawl, and made a decision. I would stop hoping for things that weren't going to happen. I would stop waiting for phone calls that wouldn't come. I would stop trying to buy love from people who saw me as a problem to be managed rather than a person to be cherished. It was time to start living for myself. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in over a year. I bought myself something nice. It wasn't expensive, just a soft, warm blanket from the department store downtown. Blue like spring sky, thick enough to keep out the Chicago cold. As I carried it home on the bus, I felt something I'd almost forgotten, the simple pleasure of taking care of my own needs. That afternoon, I called the legal aid clinic Mrs. Garcia had told me about. I wanted to make sure my will was in order, to understand my rights as a senior citizen, to get advice about protecting what little assets I had left. The lawyer, a kind woman named Sarah Chen, listened to my story with growing concern. "Mrs. Anderson," she said when I finished, "what you've described sounds like financial elder abuse. It's more common than you might think, and unfortunately, it often involves family members." "But he's my son," I said weakly. "That doesn't give him the right to manipulate you for money, especially when he has substantial resources of his own. You have every right to protect your financial security and your emotional well-being." She helped me understand options I didn't know existed. I could change my bank account numbers to prevent any automatic transfers. I could modify my emergency contacts. I could even pursue legal action to recover some of the money if I chose to. I didn't want to take legal action against my own son, but the knowledge that I could was empowering. For the first time in months, I felt like I had some control over my own life. That night, I slept better than I had in ages, wrapped in my new blanket, warm and secure in my decision to prioritize my own well-being. The isolation continued through the winter, but it felt different now. Instead of painful loneliness, it began to feel like peaceful solitude. I started cooking meals I enjoyed instead of just eating whatever was cheapest. I bought books I wanted to read instead of trying to save every penny. Mrs. Garcia became a regular companion, inviting me for dinner at least twice a week. Her small apartment was always warm and filled with the scents of cumin and fresh cilantro, and she had stories that made me laugh until my sides hurt. She talked about her own children, who lived far away but called every Sunday without fail. "They send me money sometimes," she told me one evening as we shared plantains and rice. "But I tell them no. I say, send me pictures of my grandchildren. Send me letters. Come visit if you can. But keep your money. I raised you to be independent, not to take care of your old mother." I envied the clarity of her boundaries, the way she'd maintained her dignity while still enjoying close relationships with her adult children. Spring arrived early that year, and with it came an unexpected phone call. "Grandma Dorothy?" I recognized the voice immediately, though it had gotten deeper since the last time we'd spoken. "Ellie?" My granddaughter was now 16, almost grown, with a voice that cracked with emotion. "I miss you," she said simply. "I've been wanting to call for months, but Mom said you were going through some kind of phase and needed space." A phase. That's how they characterized my decision to stop enabling their financial exploitation. "I'm not going through a phase, sweetheart," I said gently. "I'm just learning to take better care of myself. Can I come visit you? I got my license, and I have a car now. Dad bought it for me for my birthday." Of course he did. He could afford to buy his daughter a car but couldn't spare a blanket for his shivering mother. I would love to see you, I said, and meant it completely. Ellie came the following Saturday, and the moment I saw her standing at my door with a bouquet of tulips from the grocery store, I started crying. She looked so much like Marcus had at that age, but there was something in her eyes that he'd never had, genuine warmth and concern for others. Your apartment is so cozy, she said as she looked around, and I could tell she meant it. She didn't see the worn furniture or the small space. She saw home. We spent the afternoon talking about her school, her boyfriend, her plans for college. She was interested in social work, she told me, because she wanted to help elderly people who didn't have family support. A lot of old people are really lonely, she said as she helped me make tea. It seems like their families just forget about them once they're not useful anymore. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. When she was getting ready to leave, she hugged me tight and whispered, "I'm sorry about how Dad and Mom have been treating you. It's not right. You don't need to apologize for their choices," I told her. "You're not responsible for their behavior. But I feel bad that you're alone so much." "I'm learning the difference between being alone and being lonely," I said. "Sometimes being alone is exactly what you need to remember who you are." She promised to visit again soon, and unlike her parents' empty promises, I believed her. Summer brought more changes. I joined a knitting circle at the community center near Wicker Park, a group of women ranging in age from 50 to 85 who met every Tuesday afternoon. We'd work on projects together: scarves for the homeless shelter, baby blankets for the hospital, comfort shawls for cancer patients. It was the first time in years I'd felt truly productive, like my skills and time mattered to someone. Martha, the group leader, was a retired teacher who treated everyone with respect and kindness. "Every stitch is an act of love," she'd say as we worked, whether it's for someone we know or someone we've never met. The women in the group became friends, real friends who cared about each other beyond what we could provide for them. We'd share stories, recipes, advice about everything from arthritis remedies to the best places to shop for groceries on a budget. For the first time since Robert died, I felt like I belonged somewhere. In July, I made a decision that surprised even me. I bought myself a new dress. It was nothing fancy, just a simple blue sundress from the discount store, but it made me feel pretty and young again. I wore it to the community center's summer potluck, and 3 different people complimented me on it. "You look radiant," Martha said as we served lemonade to the other attendees. "There's something different about you lately. You seem happier." She was right. I was happier. Not the desperate, needy happiness that depended on other people's approval, but a quiet contentment that came from knowing I was taking care of myself with the same tenderness I'd once reserved only for others. That same week, I received a phone call that I'd been half expecting but dreading nonetheless. "Mom?" Marcus's voice was strained, less confident than usual. "Hello, Marcus. Look, I think we need to talk. Face to face. Can we set up a video call with the whole family?" I considered his request carefully. Part of me wanted to refuse, to maintain the peaceful boundaries I'd established. But another part, the part that remembered holding him as a baby, teaching him to read, cheering at his graduation, still hoped that somehow we could find our way back to each other. "All right," I said finally. "When?" "How about Sunday afternoon? Around 2? That Sunday, I prepared for the conversation like I was going to battle. I dressed carefully in my new blue dress, did my hair, and set up my tablet on the kitchen table with good lighting. If this was going to be a confrontation, I would face it with dignity. When the video call connected, I saw all 3 of them crowded onto their leather sofa, Marcus in the middle, Jennifer on one side, Ellie on the other. The contrast was stark, their beautiful, expensive living room versus my small, humble kitchen. "Hi, Mom," Marcus said, his voice falsely cheerful. "You look nice." "Thank you. We wanted to talk because we feel like there's been some misunderstanding between us. We miss you, and we want to work things out." I waited for him to continue, saying nothing. Jennifer leaned forward, her smile bright and artificial. "Dorothy, we know you've been upset about the money situation, and we want you to know we hear your concerns. We've been talking about ways to include you more in our lives." "Include me more?" As if I were a peripheral character in my own family story. "What does that mean, exactly?" I asked. "Well," Marcus said, "we were thinking maybe you could come over for dinner once a month. And we could call you more regularly. Maybe every 2 weeks? Once a month. Every 2 weeks." The bare minimum of contact they thought they could get away with while still appearing to be dutiful family members. "And what about the money?" I asked directly. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "What about it? Will you be continuing to ask for financial help from your mother who lives on Social Security?" Another uncomfortable pause. "Well, sometimes emergencies come up." "No," I said quietly but firmly. "That's not going to happen anymore." Jennifer's smile faltered. "Dorothy, we understand you want to feel more independent, but family helps family. That's how it works." You're absolutely right, I said, reaching for something I'd placed on the table before the call began. Family does help family. I held up the old family photo, the one from our last Christmas together before Robert died. Marcus as a young teenager, Robert with his arm around my waist, all of us smiling like we believed happiness would last forever. This used to represent everything I valued most in the world, I said, looking directly into the camera. Family. Love. Connection. I paused, letting them see the photo clearly. But somewhere along the way, this became something else. It became a tool you used to manipulate me. A reminder of obligations that only seemed to flow in one direction. Slowly, deliberately, I began to tear the photo down the middle. Mom, what are you doing? Marcus's voice cracked with something that might have been genuine distress. I'm setting us all free, I said as the pieces of the photo separated in my hands. You're free from having to pretend you care about an elderly mother you find burdensome. And I'm free from trying to buy love from people who see me as an ATM machine. The pieces of the photo drifted to the table like autumn leaves. Jennifer's mask finally slipped completely. You're being incredibly selfish, Dorothy. After everything we've done for you, what have you done for me? I interrupted, my voice still calm but carrying steel underneath. Name one thing you've done for me in the past 2 years that didn't involve me giving you money first. Silence. I'll wait, I said. More silence. I thought so. I looked directly at Marcus, searching his face for any sign of the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. I raised you to be a good man, Marcus. I taught you about kindness and responsibility and treating others with respect. Somewhere along the way, you decided those lessons didn't apply to your own mother. His face flushed red. Mom, you're being dramatic. We just want our family back together. No, I said with absolute certainty. You want your funding source back in line. There's a difference. I leaned closer to the camera, my voice dropping to almost a whisper. I will no longer buy love. I will not purchase affection with social security checks or sell my dignity for the illusion of family connection. You will respect me as a human being with worth beyond my bank account, or you will lose me entirely. Those are your choices. The video call ended with raised voices, hurt feelings, and no resolution. But for the first time in years, I felt like I'd spoken my complete truth. That night, I celebrated by ordering Chinese takeout, not because it was cheap, but because it sounded good. I ate it while sitting on my couch, wrapped in my blue blanket, watching an old movie and feeling more at peace than I had in months. The days following the confrontation were quiet. I half expected angry phone calls or guilt-laden text messages, but neither came. Instead, there was simply silence, and I was surprised to discover that silence felt like relief. 2 weeks later, however, Mrs. Garcia knocked on my door with a worried expression. Mija, she said, I heard something today that you need to know about. She'd been talking to Mrs. Patterson from the 3rd floor, who'd mentioned running into Jennifer at the grocery store. According to Mrs. Patterson, Jennifer had been telling people in the neighborhood that I was becoming senile, that I was paranoid and unstable, possibly a danger to myself. She said you've been having episodes, Mrs. Garcia reported with obvious distaste. Paranoid delusions about money. She made it sound like you need to be in a care facility. The cruelty of it hit me like a physical blow. Not content with financial exploitation, they were now trying to destroy my reputation, to paint me as a confused old woman whose concerns about their behavior were just symptoms of mental decline. I felt the familiar tightness in my chest, the urge to call Marcus and defend myself, to prove I was perfectly lucid and capable. But then I stopped. Let them spread their lies. Anyone who knew me, Mrs. Garcia, the women at the knitting circle, Sarah Chen at the legal aid clinic, knew the truth. Instead of angry confrontation, I chose quiet dignity. I sent one text message to Marcus, I am clearer now than I have ever been. Your character speaks for itself. Then I blocked his number and Jennifer's, feeling like I was finally closing the door on a chapter of my life that had brought more pain than joy. Spring arrived with unusual warmth that year, and with it came a sense of rebirth I hadn't expected to feel again at 73. I started taking walks along the lakefront, something I hadn't done in years because I'd always felt too rushed, too obligated to be available for other people's needs. The walks became a daily ritual, a time to think and remember who I was before I defined myself entirely through my relationships with others. I'd sit on benches overlooking Lake Michigan and watch the water change colors as the sun moved across the sky. One particularly beautiful morning in May, I made a decision that would have terrified the old Dorothy. I began planning a trip. I'd never traveled alone. In 35 years of marriage, Robert and I had taken a few modest vacations together, but after he died, the idea of going anywhere by myself seemed impossible. Too expensive, too complicated, too lonely. But I wasn't the same person who'd been paralyzed by those fears. I had money now, money that wasn't being drained by other people's manufactured emergencies. I had freedom, no one depending on me to solve their problems or subsidize their lifestyle. Most importantly, I had curiosity about what life might hold if I stopped limiting myself based on other people's expectations. I chose Colorado, partly because I'd always wanted to see the mountains and partly because it felt like the opposite of everything familiar. Not the flat, urban landscape of Chicago, but vast open spaces and clean air and silence broken only by wind through pine trees. The trip planning became a joyful obsession. I researched hotels, attractions, restaurants. I bought a new suitcase, a real one, not the old duffel bag I'd used for the handful of overnight trips I'd taken in the past decade. When I told the women at the knitting circle about my plans, they responded with enthusiasm and advice. Martha had traveled extensively before her husband's illness and gave me tips about packing light and staying safe. Ruth recommended travel insurance and comfortable walking shoes. It's never too late for an adventure, said Helen, who was 82 and planning her own trip to visit her great-grandchildren in Oregon. The only thing worse than being old and alone is being old and regretful. 3 days before I was scheduled to leave for Colorado, Ellie called. Grandma, I heard you're going on a trip. I am. How did you know? Mrs. Garcia told her granddaughter, who goes to my school. She said you're going to the mountains by yourself. That's so cool. Her genuine excitement warmed my heart. I'm nervous about it, I admitted. You shouldn't be. You're braver than you know. We talked for over an hour, about her upcoming senior year, her college applications, her part-time job at the local library. She was becoming such a thoughtful, independent young woman, and I felt proud to be her grandmother even if the connection to her parents had been severed. Can I come visit you when you get back? She asked. I want to hear all about your adventure. I would love that, sweetheart. The Colorado trip exceeded every expectation I dared to have. I stayed in a small hotel in Estes Park, with a balcony overlooking snow-capped peaks that made me catch my breath every morning. I took a guided tour of Rocky Mountain National Park, hiked gentle trails through aspen groves, and ate dinner by myself in restaurants without feeling self-conscious or lonely. For the first time in decades, I felt completely present in my own life instead of constantly worrying about someone else's needs or emotions. On my last night in Colorado, I sat on my hotel balcony with a glass of wine, watching the sun set behind the mountains and thinking about how far I'd come. A year ago, I'd been a woman who begged for blankets and received laughter in return. Now I was someone who could travel alone to beautiful places and enjoy my own company. The transformation hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. When I returned to Chicago, the city felt different, not smaller or more limiting, but more manageable. My apartment, which had felt like a prison during the worst months, now felt like a cozy sanctuary I was happy to return to. Ellie came to visit as promised, arriving with flowers and a photo album where she'd carefully mounted pictures from our conversations and visits over the past few months. I wanted you to have something that shows how important you are to me, she said as we went through the pages together. The photos told the story of my gradual transformation, the early ones showing a tired, sad-looking woman, and the later ones revealing someone who looked confident, relaxed, genuinely happy. You look like yourself again, Ellie said, pointing to a recent picture Martha had taken of me at the community center. Not like. I don't know. Not like you were trying so hard to make everyone else happy that you forgot about your own happiness. That summer, I made another decision that would have shocked the old Dorothy. I started dating. Not seriously, and not with any particular expectations, but I accepted an invitation from Harold, a widower I'd met at the community center, to attend a concert in Millennium Park. It had been over 15 years since I'd been on anything resembling a date, and I approached it with the same sense of adventure I'd brought to my Colorado trip. Harold was a retired electrician whose wife had died 3 years earlier from Alzheimer's. He understood loss, loneliness, and the challenge of rebuilding identity after decades of defining yourself primarily through your relationships with others. I spent 2 years thinking I was too old to start over, he told me as we listened to classical music under the stars. Then I realized that starting over isn't about age. It's about deciding you deserve to be happy. We became friends first, then companions, then something warmer but without the desperate need that had characterized my younger relationships. We both had grown children who lived their own lives, and we both had learned to be content alone. Our connection was based on choice rather than need, which made it infinitely more satisfying. By autumn, I had begun to feel like I was living in a completely different life than the one I'd inhabited just 12 months earlier. Instead of anxiously checking my phone for messages that rarely came from family members who didn't really care, I was busy with activities and relationships that brought genuine joy. The knitting circle had become the center of my social life, but not in a desperate way. We'd expanded beyond Tuesday meetings to include occasional dinners out, group trips to museums, and informal gatherings at each other's homes. Harold and I had settled into a comfortable routine of spending time together several times a week without either of us feeling obligated or suffocated. He had his poker night with retired friends, I had my coffee mornings with Mrs. Garcia. We both valued our independence too much to give it up, but we'd found that sharing some parts of our lives made both of us happier. My financial situation had stabilized too. Without the constant drain of supporting Marcus and Jennifer's lifestyle, my social security went much further. I could afford small luxuries like fresh flowers for my apartment, occasional dinners out, and even modest contributions to a small savings account for future trips. Most importantly, I'd learned to spend money on myself without guilt. The woman who used to agonize over buying milk versus bread could now purchase both, plus the occasional book or item of clothing that made me feel good. That Christmas, instead of spending the holiday alone hoping for phone calls that wouldn't come, I hosted dinner for Mrs. Garcia, Harold, and 3 other friends from the community center. My small apartment was crowded but warm, filled with laughter and conversation that had nothing to do with financial problems or family drama. We exchanged modest gifts, books, homemade cookies, small plants for kitchen windowsills. The total cost was probably less than one of the emergency loans I used to provide to Marcus, but the value was immeasurable. On New Year's Eve, I did something that would have been inconceivable 2 years earlier. I wrote myself a letter of appreciation. Dear Dorothy, it began, you have survived the loss of your husband, the challenge of raising a son alone, financial insecurity, and the heartbreak of discovering you were being exploited by the people you loved most. You have learned to set boundaries, to value yourself, to find joy in simple pleasures and genuine relationships. You are stronger than you knew, more resilient than you imagined, and deserving of all the happiness you've found. I sealed the letter in an envelope and put it in my desk drawer, next to the notebook where I'd once tracked money sent to ungrateful recipients. Now the drawer held evidence of abundance rather than depletion, photos from Colorado, thank you notes from the knitting circle, tickets from concerts and museums, letters from my cousin in California. Spring brought its own challenges, though they were different from the painful struggles of previous years. In March, I learned through Mrs. Garcia's network of neighborhood connections that Marcus and Jennifer were having financial difficulties. Apparently, some of their investments hadn't performed as expected, and they were struggling with mortgage payments on their expensive townhouse. The old Dorothy would have immediately called to offer help, would have found a way to send money even if it meant eating peanut butter sandwiches for weeks. But the new Dorothy felt something different, a moment of sadness for their situation, followed by firm resolution that this was not her problem to solve. Good people don't take advantage of their elderly mothers, Mrs. Garcia said when she shared the gossip. Whatever trouble they're having now, they brought on themselves. I nodded, feeling the truth of her words. I felt no satisfaction in their struggles, but I also felt no obligation to rescue them from consequences they'd created through their own choices. In April, I received an unexpected phone call from someone I hadn't heard from in over a year. Mrs. Anderson? This is Jennifer. Her voice was different, less confident, almost pleading. I hesitated before responding, my finger hovering over the button to end the call. What do you want, Jennifer? Marcus and I have been talking, and we think maybe we were too hasty in how we handled things with you. We miss having you in our lives. The manipulation was so transparent it almost made me laugh. They didn't miss me, they missed my money. But I was curious to hear how she'd try to phrase her request. We were wondering if maybe you'd be open to reconciling. To putting the past behind us and being a family again. What does that look like to you? I asked. Well, we could have dinner together. Maybe you could come to Ellie's graduation. We could try to rebuild our relationship. There was a long pause, and I could practically hear her internal debate about whether to mention money directly. And, she finally continued, we know you've been doing well financially since you started managing your money differently. If you ever wanted to help us out the way family members help each other. There it was. The real reason for the call. Jennifer, I said calmly, I am doing well financially because I stopped giving money to people who took advantage of me. I started putting my own needs first instead of enabling adult children who were perfectly capable of supporting themselves. But we're family. Family members don't lie about their wealth while taking money from elderly relatives living on Social Security. Family members don't laugh when their mother asks for basic comfort. Family members don't spread rumors about mental illness when they don't get their way. The silence on her end told me she knew exactly what I was referring to. I wish you and Marcus well, I continued, but I'm not interested in returning to a relationship built on financial exploitation disguised as family obligation. If you ever want to have an authentic relationship with me, one based on mutual respect rather than economic benefit, you're welcome to call. But if this conversation is about money, we're done. I hung up feeling proud of my clarity and firmness. The old Dorothy would have been shaking and second-guessing herself. The new Dorothy felt calm and confident in her boundaries. That same week, Ellie called with news that filled me with joy. She'd been accepted to Northwestern University with a partial scholarship to study social work. I want to specialize in elder advocacy, she told me excitedly. There are so many older adults who don't have family support, or who have families that take advantage of them. I want to help people understand their rights and protect themselves. I smiled, thinking about how the pain of my own experience had somehow contributed to inspiring my granddaughter to help others in similar situations. I'm so proud of you, I said, and meant every word. I was wondering, would you maybe want to come to my graduation? I know things are complicated with Mom and Dad, but you're important to me, and I want you there. The thought of being in the same room with Marcus and Jennifer made my stomach clench, but the thought of missing Ellie's graduation was worse. I wouldn't miss it for the world, I told her. Graduation day arrived bright and sunny, perfect weather for the outdoor ceremony at her high school. I wore my blue dress, the one I'd bought the previous summer when I first started taking care of myself, and brought a small bouquet of flowers. I arrived early and chose a seat toward the back, hoping to avoid confrontation with Marcus and Jennifer. But as families began filling the auditorium, I spotted them across the aisle, dressed expensively as always. Marcus looked older, more tired than I remembered. Jennifer seemed tense, constantly checking her phone and whispering urgently to my son. The financial stress Mrs. Garcia had mentioned was apparently taking its toll. When Ellie's name was called and she walked across the stage to receive her diploma, I clapped loudly and felt my eyes fill with tears of pride. She looked radiant, confident, ready to take on the world. After the ceremony, I was preparing to leave quietly when Ellie spotted me and ran over, still wearing her cap and gown. "Grandma, you came." She hugged me tight, and over her shoulder, I saw Marcus and Jennifer approaching hesitantly. "Hi, Mom," Marcus said quietly. "Hello, Marcus." Jennifer. The four of us stood there awkwardly for a moment, years of hurt and anger swirling in the air between us. "Thank you for coming," Marcus said finally. It means a lot to Ellie. "She's my granddaughter," I said simply. "I love her." Jennifer shifted uncomfortably, and I could see the calculation in her eyes, weighing whether this was an opportunity to push for reconciliation. But Ellie, wise beyond her 18 years, sensed the tension and smoothly guided the conversation away from dangerous territory. "Grandma, would you like to come to dinner with us? We're going to that Italian place on Lincoln Avenue." I looked at my granddaughter's hopeful face, then at her parents' uncomfortable expressions, and made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. "I would love to have dinner with you, Ellie. But I think it would be better if we went somewhere just the two of us. We have a lot to catch up on." Relief and disappointment flickered across various faces, but Ellie beamed. "That sounds perfect. Can we go to that little cafe near your apartment? The one with the good soup?" "Of course, sweetheart." As we walked away together, I heard Jennifer say something sharp to Marcus, but I didn't look back. I was focused on the present moment, on celebrating my granddaughter's achievement without the emotional complications that would have dominated a family dinner. Over soup and sandwiches, Ellie told me about her college plans, her excitement about studying social work, her boyfriend who was also going to Northwestern to study education. "I want to help people like you," she said as we shared a piece of chocolate cake. "People who get taken advantage of because they're older, or because they love their families so much they don't see what's happening to them." "What happened to me taught me something important," I told her. "It taught me that I can survive disappointment, betrayal, even abandonment. And once you know you can survive those things, you realize you don't have to accept them." She nodded seriously. "I hope Dad and Mom figure that out someday. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But that's their choice to make. My job is to live my own life with dignity and joy, regardless of their choices." That summer brought more adventures and deeper contentment. Harold and I took a weekend trip to Wisconsin, staying in a bed and breakfast near a lake where we spent long afternoons reading and talking. The Knitting Circle organized a group trip to a fiber arts festival, where I learned new techniques and bought beautiful yarn I never would have splurged on before. I started volunteering at the legal aid clinic where Sarah Chen worked, helping other elderly clients understand their rights and options when dealing with family financial exploitation. It was meaningful work that turned my painful experience into something useful for others. "You have a gift for this," Sarah told me after I'd helped a 78-year-old man realize his son had been stealing from his bank account. "You understand what these clients are going through in a way that someone who hasn't experienced it never could." The volunteer work became one of my most fulfilling activities, proof that even the worst experiences can be transformed into sources of strength and wisdom. As autumn approached again, marking nearly 2 years since the blanket incident that changed everything, I found myself reflecting on the journey I'd taken from desperate loneliness to authentic contentment. The differences were everywhere, in my improved financial situation, in my social connections, in my physical health, in my mental clarity, but most of all in my sense of self-worth. I no longer jumped every time the phone rang, hoping it would be Marcus calling to include me in his life. I no longer checked my bank account with anxiety, wondering what emergency would drain my resources next. I no longer felt guilty for spending money on myself or saying no to requests that would compromise my own well-being. Instead, I woke up each morning with genuine interest in what the day might bring. I had places to go, people who were happy to see me, activities that challenged and fulfilled me. Most importantly, I had learned to be good company for myself. The woman who used to dread being alone now treasured solitude as an opportunity for reading, reflection, and peaceful productivity. On a crisp October evening, exactly 2 years after I'd sent that text asking for a blanket, I sat by my window with a cup of tea and my current knitting project, a complex shawl pattern I never would have attempted when my hands shook with anxiety and my mind was consumed with other people's problems. The apartment was warm, heated by a new radiator the landlord had finally installed after I'd learned to advocate for myself more effectively. I was wrapped in not one but 2 beautiful blankets I'd bought myself, the blue one from that first day of liberation, and a newer one in deep green that Harold had surprised me with for my 74th birthday. My phone buzzed with a text message, and for just a moment, muscle memory made my heart rate spike. But when I looked at the screen, it was just Martha from the Knitting Circle, sharing a photo of her new grandson. I smiled and typed back a congratulatory message, then set the phone aside and returned to my knitting. The peace in my small apartment was profound, not the desperate quiet of loneliness, but the rich silence of contentment. Outside my window, Chicago sparkled in the autumn darkness, and I felt grateful for this city that had taught me resilience, for the community I'd found within it, and for the woman I'd discovered I could become when I stopped defining myself solely through other people's needs and expectations. The old Dorothy had begged for a blanket and received ridicule. The new Dorothy surrounded herself with warmth she created for herself, in surroundings she could afford because she'd stopped subsidizing other people's lifestyles, among people who valued her for who she was rather than what she could provide. As I settled into my evening routine, the tea, the knitting, the peaceful solitude I'd learned to treasure, I thought about all the women sitting in legal aid offices, all the elderly people checking their phones for calls that wouldn't come, all the parents wondering if their adult children loved them or just loved their money. I wanted them to know what I'd learned, that it's never too late to choose your own well-being over other people's convenience. That love that has to be purchased isn't really love at all. That sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop enabling their worst impulses while you learn to honor your own worth. I wanted them to know that loneliness is temporary, but self-respect, once reclaimed, can last forever. The shawl pattern was coming along beautifully, each stitch precise and intentional. Like my new life, it was something I was creating carefully, mindfully, for my own joy and satisfaction. And like my new life, it was turning out far more beautiful than I'd originally dared to imagine. As the evening grew later and the city settled into quiet, I felt the deep satisfaction of a day well lived, of a life reclaimed, of a future full of possibilities I was brave enough to explore. Tomorrow, Harold and I were planning to visit the Art Institute. Next week, the Knitting Circle was starting a new charity project. Next month, I was thinking about another trip, maybe to visit my cousin in California. The calendar that used to stretch ahead empty and frightening now held adventures, appointments, and activities I'd chosen for myself. I was no longer waiting for other people to include me in their lives, I was busy living my own. And on cold nights, when the Chicago wind held around the building and memories of old hurts tried to creep back in, I had plenty of warm blankets. I had learned to keep myself warm. At midnight that first night, I had texted a simple request for basic human comfort and received laughter in return. 2 years later, at midnight on an October evening, I sat surrounded by warmth I'd created for myself, comfort I'd earned through my own courage to change what wasn't working. The journey from desperation to dignity hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every difficult step. But my story doesn't end there. Because sometimes, when you learn to truly value yourself, life has unexpected gifts in store. 3 months after that peaceful October evening, I received a phone call that would change everything yet again. But this time, the change would be purely joyful. Mrs. Anderson? This is Dr. Patricia Williams from the Community Outreach Foundation. I didn't recognize the name or organization, so I listened carefully. We received your name from Sarah Chen at the Legal Aid Clinic. She tells us you've been doing remarkable work with elderly clients who are experiencing family financial abuse. My volunteer work had been expanding in recent months. Word had spread through the senior community about a woman who understood what it felt like to be exploited by your own children, who could offer both practical advice and emotional support to others in similar situations. We're starting a new program, Dr. Williams continued, specifically focused on elder advocacy and financial protection. We're looking for someone with your experience and insight to help develop it. It would be a paid position, not a lot, but enough to supplement your Social Security significantly. A job. At 74 years old, I was being offered meaningful employment that would use my life experience to help others. I'm very interested, I said, trying to keep the excitement out of my voice. When can we meet? The position turned out to be perfect for me. 3 days a week, I worked at the Foundation's office near downtown, developing educational materials, training volunteers, and personally counseling seniors who were struggling with family financial exploitation. The other 2 days, I worked from home, writing articles and creating resources for their website. The pay was modest but steady, and combined with my Social Security, it gave me more financial security than I'd had since Robert died. For the first time in decades, I could make choices based on what I wanted rather than what I could afford. But more than the money, the work gave me profound purpose. Every day, I met people whose stories echoed my own: elderly parents being manipulated by adult children, grandparents whose Social Security checks were being diverted to fund other people's lifestyles, seniors who felt guilty for setting boundaries with family members who took advantage of their love. "You saved my life," a 79-year-old woman named Margaret told me after I'd helped her realize that her daughter's emergencies always seemed to coincide with her Social Security payments. "I thought I was going crazy, thinking terrible things about my own child. But you helped me see that protecting myself isn't selfish, it's necessary." Stories like Margaret's filled my days and my heart. Each person I helped felt like validation that my own painful experience had served a purpose. The work also brought me into contact with other professionals who became valued colleagues and friends. Dr. Williams became a mentor who taught me about the psychology of elder abuse. James Martinez, the Foundation's legal consultant, helped me understand the complex laws surrounding financial exploitation. Linda Foster, a social worker who specialized in family dynamics, showed me how to help clients set boundaries without completely severing family relationships when that wasn't what they wanted. Working alongside these dedicated professionals, I felt intellectually stimulated in ways I hadn't experienced since I was much younger. They valued my insights, sought my opinions, and treated me as an equal contributor to important work. 6 months into the job, Dr. Williams approached me with an unexpected opportunity. "Dorothy, we've been invited to present our elder advocacy program at the National Conference on Aging in Washington, D.C. I'd like you to be the lead presenter, to tell your story and share what we've learned from our clients. Are you interested?" Standing in front of hundreds of professionals from across the country, sharing my personal story of exploitation and recovery, felt terrifying. But it also felt like the ultimate transformation of my pain into purpose. "Yes," I said without hesitation. "I'd be honored." Preparing for the conference presentation became a 6-week intensive project. I worked with Dr. Williams and Linda to craft a speech that would be both personal and professional, emotional and educational. We practiced until I could tell my story without my voice shaking, until I could present statistics about elder financial abuse with the confidence of an expert. The night before the conference, as I sat in my hotel room in Washington, D.C. reviewing my notes one final time, I thought about how far I'd traveled, not just geographically, but personally. 2.5 years ago, I'd been a woman begging her son for a blanket. Now I was preparing to address a national conference as a recognized expert in elder advocacy. The presentation went better than I dared to hope. The auditorium was packed, and the audience was engaged from the first moment I spoke. I told them about the midnight text, about the laughter that followed, about the years of financial manipulation I'd endured without recognizing it for what it was. But I also told them about the hope that was possible. About the community I'd found, the love I'd discovered for myself, the meaningful work that had emerged from my willingness to change what wasn't working. "Elder abuse thrives in silence and shame," I said as I concluded my remarks. "When we help seniors understand that they deserve respect and dignity regardless of their age, when we give them tools to protect themselves and permission to set boundaries, we don't just save their money, we save their sense of self-worth. And that might be the most important work any of us can do." The standing ovation lasted nearly 5 minutes. Afterward, dozens of people approached me with their own stories, their own questions, their own commitments to do better by the elderly people in their communities. But the most meaningful moment came later that evening, when I returned to my hotel room to find a message waiting on my phone. "Grandma Dorothy, I saw the video of your speech online. I'm so proud of you. You're changing the world. Love, Ellie." She'd found the live stream of the conference and watched her grandmother address hundreds of professionals about one of the most painful periods of her life. And she was proud. I called her immediately. "Ellie, sweetheart, I can't believe you watched." "Of course I watched. Grandma, what you're doing is incredible. And the way you talked about Dad and Mom, you were so honest but also so kind. Even after everything they put you through." It was true. In my presentation, I'd been careful to focus on behaviors rather than personal attacks, to describe patterns of exploitation without demonizing the people who'd engaged in them. It hadn't been about revenge or punishment, it had been about education and prevention. "They hurt me deeply," I told Ellie. But I've learned that forgiveness isn't about excusing someone else's behavior. It's about freeing yourself from the power that hurt has over you. Are you? Would you ever consider talking to them again? If they really changed? It was a question I'd been asking myself for months as I worked with other families navigating similar dynamics. Some of my clients chose permanent estrangement as the healthiest option. Others found ways to rebuild relationships on new, healthier terms. There was no one right answer. I would consider it, I said carefully. But only if they demonstrated genuine understanding of how their behavior affected me, and only if they were willing to build a relationship based on mutual respect rather than financial benefit. Those would be non-negotiable conditions. Do you think they might ever reach that point? I don't know, sweetheart. I hope so, for their sake as much as mine. But I've learned that I can't control other people's growth or choices. I can only control my own responses. That conversation with Ellie stayed with me as I flew back to Chicago. The possibility of reconciliation with Marcus and Jennifer felt both appealing and dangerous. I'd worked so hard to build a life that didn't depend on their approval or inclusion. Was I strong enough now to risk opening that door again, even a crack? The answer came 6 weeks later, in the form of another unexpected phone call. Mom? I recognized Marcus's voice immediately, though it sounded different. Older. Humbler. Hello, Marcus. I watched your presentation. From the conference in Washington. I waited, saying nothing. I had to watch it 3 times before I could get through the whole thing, he continued. Because the first 2 times, I had to stop. Because I realized that you were talking about me. About us. About what we did to you. His voice cracked with emotion I hadn't heard from him in years. I've been going to therapy, Mom. Jennifer and I both have. We started having problems after our financial situation got worse, and we went to counseling to work on our marriage. But the therapist kept asking questions about our families, about our patterns of behavior. He paused, and I could hear him crying. She helped me understand that what we did to you wasn't normal family behavior. It was financial abuse. We manipulated you, took advantage of your love for us, treated you like a bank account instead of a person. I felt tears starting in my own eyes, not from sadness but from something that felt like relief mixed with hope. I know I don't have the right to ask for forgiveness, Marcus continued. I know we hurt you in ways that might be impossible to repair. But I need you to know that I finally understand what we did. And I'm so sorry. The old Dorothy would have immediately accepted his apology, would have rushed to reassure him that all was forgiven, would have tried to minimize the hurt to make him feel better. But the new Dorothy had learned the difference between forgiveness and enabling. I appreciate you calling, I said carefully. And I'm glad you're in therapy. That's important work. Would you be willing to meet? Not to ask for anything, not to try to go back to the way things were. Just to talk? I want to try to make amends, if that's possible. I considered the request for a long moment. My life was full now, rich with purpose and genuine relationships. I didn't need Marcus and Jennifer in it to be happy. But maybe that was exactly why I could afford to take the risk of seeing them again. I would be willing to meet, I said finally. But with conditions. Anything. We meet in a neutral location, somewhere public. And I want you to bring Jennifer, because she was part of what happened and she needs to be part of any reconciliation. If you're both genuinely committed to understanding how your behavior affected me and how our relationship would need to change, then we can talk. Yes, absolutely. Whatever you want. We arranged to meet the following Saturday at a coffee shop in Lincoln Park, neutral territory that was convenient for all of us. I spent the week preparing mentally and emotionally, talking through my expectations and boundaries with Harold, with Mrs. Garcia, with Dr. Williams, and with my therapist. Yes, I'd started seeing a counselor too, to help process this major life transition. Everyone agreed that I seemed strong enough and clear enough to handle whatever the meeting might bring. Saturday arrived gray and drizzly, typical Chicago spring weather. I dressed carefully in my blue dress and the pearl earrings I'd bought myself for my 75th birthday the month before. I wanted to look like the woman I'd become, not the woman I used to be. Marcus and Jennifer were already seated at a corner table when I arrived. They both looked older, more worn than I remembered. Jennifer's designer clothes couldn't hide the stress lines around her eyes, and Marcus had developed a nervous habit of running his hands through his hair. They stood when I approached, both looking uncertain about whether to attempt hugs or handshakes. I opted for a simple nod and took my seat across from them. Thank you for coming, Marcus said immediately. I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure I would either, I replied honestly. Jennifer spoke up for the first time. Dorothy, I want to start by saying that I owe you a huge apology. I was part of what happened to you, and there's no excuse for that. Her words sounded rehearsed, but the emotion behind them seemed genuine. We've been learning a lot in therapy, Marcus continued. About family patterns, about manipulation, about how people can hurt each other even when they don't mean to. He paused. Although I think we did mean to, at least sometimes. We knew we were taking advantage of your love for us. That admission, that they'd been conscious of their manipulation rather than just thoughtless, was harder to hear than I'd expected. But it was also more honest than anything they'd said to me in years. What I want to understand, I said, is why. You had money, substantial wealth. Why did you need to take mine? Marcus and Jennifer exchanged a look that seemed to contain an entire conversation. It started as convenience, Marcus said finally. It was easier to ask you for a few $100s than to move money around from our investments. And then? I think it became a kind of test. A test? Jennifer picked up the thread. We told ourselves that if you were willing to give us money, it meant you loved us. But looking back, I think it was the opposite. We were testing whether we could get away with it. Whether you loved us enough to let us treat you badly. The psychological insight was both illuminating and devastating. And when you said no, Marcus continued, when you finally set boundaries, we felt rejected. Like you were choosing money over family. We couldn't see that we were the ones who'd made it about money in the first place. I sat quietly, processing their words. This level of self-awareness and accountability was more than I'd dared to hope for, but also more painful than simple denial would have been. What changed? I asked. Our investments tanked, Jennifer said bluntly. The crypto market collapsed, and we lost a lot of money. Suddenly we really did need help, and we realized. We'd burned the bridge to the one person who'd always been there for us. And in therapy, we started talking about our families, Marcus added. About how we related to our parents. Our therapist asked me to describe our relationship with you, and when I did, she got this look on her face. This concerned, professional look. And she said, that doesn't sound like a healthy family dynamic. It took months of sessions before I could really see it, Jennifer said. Before I could understand that what we'd been doing wasn't normal family support, it was exploitation. They talked for another hour, sharing insights from therapy, acknowledging specific incidents I'd almost forgotten, accepting responsibility for patterns of behavior that had lasted for years. It was more accountability than I'd ever expected to receive. But accountability wasn't the same as reconciliation. I need you to understand something, I said as our conversation began to wind down. What you did to me almost broke me. Not just financially, but emotionally, psychologically. I went through a period where I questioned my own worth, where I wondered if I was only valuable for what I could provide to others. Both of them were crying openly now. But I survived it, I continued. I built a new life, found meaningful work, developed genuine friendships, learned to value myself. I'm happy now, genuinely happy, in ways I haven't been in years. Marcus nodded, wiping his eyes. We saw. In your presentation, and in what Ellie tells us about your life now. We're so proud of what you've accomplished. The question is, I said, what kind of relationship, if any, would be healthy for all of us going forward? It was Jennifer who answered first. We don't expect to go back to the way things were, she said. We can't undo what we did. But if you'd be willing, we'd like to try to build something new. Something based on respect instead of what it was before. What would that look like to you? Marcus leaned forward. Regular contact that isn't about asking for anything. Real conversations about your life, your interests, your work. Being there for you the way you were always there for us. And no money, Jennifer added quickly. We never want to have financial interactions with you again, in either direction. We want to keep that completely separate from our relationship. I considered their words carefully. The boundaries they were proposing were exactly what I would have insisted on, which suggested they'd done real work to understand what had gone wrong. I appreciate what you've shared today, I said finally. And I'm glad you're both in therapy. That's important work, and it sounds like it's helping. They waited, tension visible in their faces. I'm willing to try rebuilding a relationship with you, I continued, but it will have to be gradual. And the first sign that we're slipping back into old patterns, any manipulation, any financial requests, any attempt to make me feel guilty for having boundaries, and I'll walk away permanently. Yes, Marcus said immediately. Whatever you need. I also want you to understand that my life is full now. I have work I love, relationships that fulfill me, activities that bring me joy. I'm not sitting around waiting for you to include me in your lives anymore. If we rebuild our relationship, it will be because it adds value for all of us, not because I need you to feel complete. The meeting ended with cautious hugs and an agreement to start with monthly phone calls, with the possibility of occasional in-person visits if things went well. Walking home from that coffee shop, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Hope and wariness, grief for what we'd lost and possibility for what we might build. But underlying all of it was a steady sense of my own strength, my own worth, my own ability to handle whatever came next. The rebuilding process was indeed gradual. The first few phone calls were stilted, full of awkward pauses and careful politeness. But slowly, we began to find our way to more natural conversations. They asked about my work at the foundation, my travels with Harold, my knitting projects. I asked about Ellie's progress in college, Jennifer's new job at a nonprofit, a career change that seemed to reflect some genuine personal growth, Marcus's efforts to rebuild their financial situation through legitimate means. By summer, we'd progressed to occasional dinners together. The interactions were pleasant but careful, all of us conscious of not falling back into old patterns. When Marcus offered to pay for a restaurant meal, I insisted on splitting the check. When Jennifer complimented a sweater I was wearing, I simply said thank you instead of offering to knit her one. The biggest test came in September, when their air conditioning broke during a heat wave and they faced a repair bill they couldn't easily afford. The old Marcus might have called me with a sob story about emergency expenses. Instead, he mentioned the situation casually during our monthly phone call, along with his plan to take out a small loan to cover the cost. That sounds like a reasonable solution, I said, and felt proud of both of us, him for handling his problem independently, me for not jumping in to rescue him. 6 months into our reconciliation attempt, something shifted. The conversations became more relaxed, the dinners more enjoyable. They started remembering details about my life and asking follow-up questions about things I'd mentioned in previous conversations. I began to feel like they were actually listening to me instead of just waiting their turn to talk. The relationship that emerged was different from what we'd had before, but in many ways it was healthier. We were relating to each other as adults with separate lives that occasionally intersected, rather than as parent and children locked in patterns of dependency and resentment. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, still times when I caught glimpses of their old entitlement or when they seemed to forget that our relationship was conditional on mutual respect. But overall, the progress was real and sustainable. More importantly, I never lost sight of the life I'd built for myself. The reconciliation with Marcus and Jennifer didn't become the center of my world. It was simply one positive element in a rich, full existence that included meaningful work, genuine friendships, romantic companionship with Harold, and the deep satisfaction of knowing I could take care of myself. A year and a half after that first coffee shop meeting, I received an invitation that felt like a true milestone. "Mom," Marcus said during one of our phone calls, "Jennifer and I were wondering if you'd be willing to come speak to our therapy group. Our therapist runs sessions sometimes for families dealing with similar issues, and she thinks your perspective could help other people." The request felt like full-circle validation. They weren't just acknowledging privately that they'd harmed me, they were willing to have me share that truth with others as part of their ongoing healing process. "I'd be honored," I said. The therapy session was powerful and emotional. I shared my story with 6 other families dealing with various forms of elder abuse and financial exploitation, and Marcus and Jennifer spoke honestly about their own behavior and recovery process. Several other participants said afterward that seeing us working toward reconciliation gave them hope for their own family relationships. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came when the therapist asked me what had made forgiveness possible. "I had to save myself first," I said without hesitation. "I had to build a life that didn't depend on their approval or inclusion. Only when I was secure in my own worth could I afford to risk letting them back in." Forgiveness isn't about excusing harmful behavior, it's about freeing yourself from the power that harm has over you. After the session, as we stood outside the therapist's office, Jennifer said something that surprised me. "Dorothy, I want you to know that what you did, cutting us off, refusing to enable us anymore, it was the kindest thing you could have done for us. We needed to face the consequences of our behavior. We needed to learn to be responsible for ourselves." Tough love, Marcus added. Real love. Not the kind that enables people to keep hurting themselves and others. I thought about that conversation often in the months that followed. It reinforced something I'd learned in my work with other families. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop rescuing them from the natural consequences of their choices. My 76th birthday that spring was the first time in years that Marcus and Jennifer remembered on their own and celebrated appropriately. They sent flowers, made a joint phone call to wish me well, and invited me to dinner at a restaurant I'd mentioned liking. It felt like a small miracle. But the real gift was that their remembrance was just one bright spot in a day that was already full of joy. Harold had planned a surprise party with the knitting circle, my colleagues from the foundation had decorated my office, and Ellie had sent a care package from college filled with homemade cookies and a card that made me cry happy tears. I was no longer dependent on any one relationship for my sense of worth or belonging. I had built a life rich with diverse connections, meaningful work, and genuine self-love. As I write this now, sitting in my warm apartment on a snowy December evening 3 years after that first blanket request, I'm surrounded by evidence of the life I've created. Thank you notes from clients whose lives were changed by our work together. Photos from my recent trip to California to visit my cousin. A beautiful quilt made by the Knitting Circle for my birthday. Books I'm reading for pleasure rather than to pass time while waiting for other people to include me in their lives. On the table beside me sits a letter I received yesterday from a woman named Patricia in Portland, Oregon. She'd seen a video of one of my conference presentations online and wrote to thank me for giving her the courage to set boundaries with her adult son who'd been draining her retirement savings. "Your story showed me that I could survive without his approval," she wrote. "It taught me that love doesn't mean letting people hurt you. I'm 78 years old, and I finally learned to put myself first. Thank you for showing me it was possible." Letters like Patricia's arrive regularly now, from people all over the country who found hope in my journey from exploitation to empowerment. Each one reminds me that my painful experience wasn't wasted, it became the foundation for helping others avoid or escape similar situations. My relationship with Marcus and Jennifer continues to evolve in positive directions. We have dinner together once a month, exchange regular phone calls, and they've become genuinely supportive of my work and my other relationships. When Harold had surgery last month, they offered to help in any way they could, not because they wanted something from me, but because they'd learned to care about the people who mattered to me. But perhaps most importantly, I no longer need their validation or approval to feel good about myself. Their presence in my life is a gift, not a necessity. I love them, but I don't depend on them for my happiness or sense of worth. Ellie graduated from Northwestern last month with highest honors and a job lined up at a nonprofit that serves elderly clients. She's become a remarkable young woman who understands the importance of treating all people, regardless of age, with dignity and respect. Sometimes I think my painful experience with her parents taught her lessons about family loyalty and personal boundaries that will serve her well throughout her life. Harold and I have been talking about marriage, not because we need to make our relationship official, but because after 4 years together, we want to celebrate our partnership publicly. We're thinking of a small ceremony next spring, surrounded by the chosen family we've both created in our later years. The work at the Community Outreach Foundation continues to expand and evolve. We've developed programs now in 12 states, and I've been invited to speak at conferences across the country. Dr. Williams jokes that I've become the face of elder advocacy, but the truth is, I'm just one voice among many calling for society to treat elderly people with the respect and protection they deserve. Last month, I was interviewed by a journalist writing an article about elder abuse for the Wall Street Journal. When she asked what advice I'd give to other seniors who suspect their families are taking advantage of them, I thought carefully before answering. "Trust your instincts," I said. "If something feels wrong, it probably is. You deserve to be treated with respect and dignity regardless of your age. And remember that you're never too old to change your circumstances, to set boundaries, to choose your own well-being over other people's convenience." I also told her something I've learned through my work with hundreds of clients: financial abuse often goes hand in hand with emotional abuse. When someone is manipulating you for money, they're usually also manipulating you emotionally, making you feel guilty, ashamed, or obligated to give them what they want. Recovery means reclaiming both your financial security and your emotional autonomy. The article was published 3 weeks ago, and since then, I've received over 200 emails from people sharing their own stories and asking for advice. Each one breaks my heart a little, but also fills me with determination to keep fighting for elderly people who deserve better treatment from their families and society as a whole. The truth is, elder abuse is epidemic in our culture, and it's largely invisible because it happens behind closed doors within families. Adult children who would never steal from strangers think nothing of borrowing from elderly parents who can't afford the loss. Families who would report financial exploitation by outsiders enable it when it comes from within. But change is possible, both on individual and systemic levels. Every person who learns to set boundaries, every family that chooses respect over exploitation, every professional who takes elder abuse seriously, it all adds up to a culture shift toward treating elderly people with the dignity they deserve. Sometimes I'm asked if I regret the years I spent enabling Marcus and Jennifer's financial exploitation. The honest answer is no. Those experiences, painful as they were, led me to understand elder abuse from the inside, which has made me infinitely more effective at helping others navigate similar situations. I also don't regret the long period of estrangement that followed. That separation was necessary for my own healing and for any hope of eventual reconciliation. I had to prove to myself that I could survive and thrive without their approval before I could risk inviting them back into my life. What I do regret is how long it took me to recognize what was happening. I wish I'd trusted my own instincts sooner, set boundaries earlier, prioritized my own well-being before the situation became so dire. But self-blame isn't productive. I did the best I could with the understanding I had at the time. The most important thing I've learned is that it's never too late to change your life. At 73, I thought my story was essentially finished, that I would spend my remaining years managing decline and hoping for occasional crumbs of attention from family members who saw me as a burden. Instead, I discovered that my story was just beginning a new chapter. I found meaningful work, genuine friendships, romantic love, and most importantly, self-respect. I learned that aging doesn't have to mean accepting mistreatment or settling for less than you deserve. Tonight, as I finish writing this story, I'm preparing for another new adventure. Harold and I are planning a winter trip to Arizona, where we'll spend 2 weeks exploring desert landscapes and staying in a resort that specifically caters to active seniors. It's a far cry from the woman who once couldn't afford heat in her Chicago apartment. But the real warmth in my life isn't about money or material comfort, although financial security certainly helps. The real warmth comes from relationships built on mutual respect, work that uses my talents and experience for meaningful purposes, and the deep contentment of knowing I can take care of myself. As I prepare for bed, I'm wrapped in the green blanket Harold gave me, surrounded by evidence of a life well lived and still being lived to its fullest. Tomorrow I have lunch with Mrs. Garcia, a knitting circle meeting in the afternoon, and dinner with Harold. Next week I'm training new volunteers at the foundation and attending a conference call with advocates in 3 other states. My calendar is full not because I'm frantically trying to fill empty time, but because I'm genuinely engaged with people and activities that bring me joy and purpose. I'm no longer waiting for other people to include me in their lives, I'm actively creating a life I want to be part of. Before I turn off the lights, I look at my phone one more time. There's a text message from Ellie, sharing news about her first week at her new job, and another from Martha, sending photos from her grandson's first birthday party. Simple messages from people who care about me for who I am, not what I can provide for them. This is what warmth really feels like, not just physical comfort, but the emotional security of knowing you're valued and respected by people who matter to you. It's taken me 76 years to fully understand the difference, but the learning has been worth every difficult step along the way. As I settle into my comfortable bed in my cozy apartment that I can afford because I learned to prioritize my own financial security, I reflect on the journey from that cold October night when I begged for a blanket to this warm December evening when I'm surrounded by comfort I've created for myself. The woman who sent that desperate text message asking for basic care and received laughter in return has learned something invaluable. The most reliable source of warmth is the one you create for yourself, through your own choices, your own work, your own commitment to treating yourself with the same kindness you'd show to anyone else you loved. I'm no longer the woman who needed rescue. I'm the woman who learned to rescue herself, and in doing so, found the strength and resources to help rescue others. Let me ask you this, have you ever lived through something similar, or do you know someone who has experienced the pain of being taken for granted by family members who should cherish them? Your story matters, and sharing it might help someone else find the courage to choose their own well-being. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart or reminded you of someone who needs to hear this message, please like this video and subscribe to help it reach others who might need the encouragement to choose dignity over desperation, self-respect over self-sacrifice. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is learn to love ourselves enough to demand better treatment from the people in our lives. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, you deserve warmth, respect, and genuine affection, no matter what your age or circumstances might be. The blanket I once begged for became the catalyst for learning to weave my own warmth. And that warmth, built from self-respect, meaningful relationships, purposeful work, and the deep peace of knowing your own worth, is the kind that never runs out, never depends on other people's generosity, and never leaves you cold and alone on a winter night. You have the power to create that warmth for yourself, no matter where you are in life right now. It's never too late to choose yourself. It's never too late to demand respect. It's never too late to build a life that brings you joy. The woman who once shivered in a thin shawl, waiting for someone else to provide comfort, has learned the most important lesson of her life. The warmth we create for ourselves is the only kind we can truly depend on. And it's more than enough.